Hey crew, it's Pitt and I'm back with some more Esoterica. Today we are diving back into the works of Mrs. Helena Blavatsky. This is The Secret Doctrine. We are reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various points brought to light by the text. It is not the format for everyone, but some people seem to find value in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in the terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above, in the box down below, along with the original source material so that you can get a better understanding of who I am and why I say the things that I do. With that being said, we are going to dive in and continue our exploration of the secret doctrine with the theories of rotation in science. This is going to be a short one today. We already discussed yesterday my theory on rotation, so I'm going to hit it real brief here at the beginning and I won't stop as we go through. I believe that everything is held in place by the plasma that makes up the Holy Spirit, right? The electromagnetic forces of creation. And that the rotation that comes is caused by the friction of the emanations, right? The sun emanates energy, and our friction as we rotate around the sun causes us to rotate in the way that we do in a day because of the friction. Now, where the original rotation came from is probably somewhat related to that as well, and it's one of those things that we will not know. It is something that we speculate upon, but as of yet, we do not have an answer to. Now, let's dive into the text. Considering that final cause is pronounced a chimera, and the first great cause is remanded to the sphere of the unknown, as a reverend gentleman justly complains, the number of hypotheses put forward, a nebula in itself, is most remarkable. The profane student is perplexed and does not know in which of the theories of exact science he has to believe. Here we have hypotheses enough for every taste and power of the brain. They were all extracted from a number of scientific volumes. And once again, I want to point out that this time period was just after the Civil War, just prior to World War I. They were just coming up with the idea of the internal combustion engine, and it would not go into mass production for another 30 years in a car. Right, the steam engine was there, but railroads were taking over, but we did not have the telephone, we didn't have television, we didn't have radar, we didn't have many of the things that we take for granted today. We didn't have electron microscopes, we had never been to space, we had never been able to fly as of yet. Kitty Hawk still hadn't happened. And so it is important to take with a grain of salt the observations that they make in this time period, because we have the lens of history to look back through so that we have a better understanding of the things that they were speculating upon. Many of the scientists that I am sure she is about to quote here did not have a correct assumption about many things, but they were making hypotheses to try and figure those things out. That is how science progresses. Somebody has an idea, you test it and see if it works or not. If it works, then somebody else tests it and see if it works for them, until you get to the point where it is commonly accepted that it is a truth, right? Our theory of gravity is a theory because we don't understand the mechanics behind it. We just understand the actions that happen from it. That is in large part because of the history, because of these hypotheses that were put forward. Some of them were dismissed, some of them were enhanced, and so we get to see through the lens of history the correct interpretation of the data. To the best of our understanding, there are still many things that we do not understand yet. The source and function of magnetism being a primary one of those. But as we go through this story, just bear in mind that at this point in time, many of our scientific advancements that we have now were not a thing. Current hypotheses explaining the origin of rotation. The rotation has originated either A, by the collision of nebular masses wandering aimlessly in space, or by attraction, in cases where no actual impact takes place. B, by the tangential action of currents of nebulous matter, in the case of an amorphous nebula, descending from higher to lower levels, or simply by the action of the central gravity of the mass. We have two footnotes here. The terms high and low being only relative to the position of the observer in space. Any use of those terms tending to convey the impression that they stand for abstract realities is necessarily fallacious. And the second one being Jacob Ennis, The Origin of the Stars, page 221. It is a fundamental principle in physics that no rotation could be generated in such a mass by the action of its own parts. As well attempt to change the course of a steamer by pulling at the deck railing. Remarks to this Professor Winchell in World Life. That is because you are not taking into account, in my estimation, the plasma and the friction thereof. Hypotheses of the origin of the 7 planets and comets. So there's only 2 hypotheses as to the origin of rotation. Is that at this point in time, a collision of nebular masses or tangential action of currents of nebulous matter. I am more along the lines of B than I am of A. Right? Because there is friction. We do run into things, but it is not necessarily inherent that we had to have run into something in order for the rotation of the planets or the orbits that they have took place. And so it is not necessarily an A plus B equals C for A, right? But for B, it kind of does. You're running into nebulous matter, which is simply matter stretched out in space. Right? We talked yesterday about the gas cloud that the planet passed through. And so it is entirely possible that there is nebulous matter that causes it, right? Now, whether it's descending from higher to lower levels, that's, again, a relative statement, like she just said. And so we don't know that for sure either. It could simply be because you're passing through space, whether you're going up or down, being relative, is whatever, right? To get the proper perspective, right? If you were to go out on the spring equinox, right before dawn, right, just before the sun comes up, and it's going to be off to your left, you face south, it's off to your left, right, come the east, and you face south and you lay flat on the ground and you look straight up, you're looking forward into space. If you do the exact same thing during the fall equinox at sunset, just after the sun goes down off to your right, and you look forward in space, or lay down and you look up, you're looking backwards in space, right? That is the correct orientation when you're talking about anything, right? If you are looking out into forward into space or behind us in space, because the sun is moving, right? The sun moves through space just the same way that we do. It is rotating around something farther out that we do not know or understand yet, but it is entirely plausible that it is. And so, just to keep the proper perspective of where we are when we're talking about higher and lower, right? When you're laying there, anything towards the North Pole is going to be higher, anything towards the South Pole is going to be lower in a relative situation to where you are. But if you were to turn around and face north, and everything above your head is going to be south, and everything below your feet is going to be north, that will be up and down, and it's all relative to your position. Space, the problem, the reason why we haven't gone back to the moon, y'all want to know the reason why we don't go to the moon on a regular basis, is because it is entirely difficult to hit a moving object that is moving through tangential space. So the sun is moving through space, and we are moving around the sun, and then the moon is moving around us as we move around the sun. So all of these pieces are moving in this direction, while this other piece is also moving in various directions. To hit that point is exceedingly difficult. We've done it, but it is an exceedingly difficult thing to do. And the farther out in space you get, the harder it is, because there are variables that isn't hard to take into account. Right? We talked yesterday about the gas cloud that our solar system just recently exited from. Well, if we hit a pocket of gas while we're moving through space, you can miss it by 15 or 20 minutes, right? Depending on the density of the gas and how big it is. And 15 or 20 minutes can be an enormous difference when you're talking about moving millions of miles at an hour. And so it is exceedingly difficult to hit points in space. That's why we have such trouble with navigation now. It's why we don't make a effort often to get to the moon. Because one, there's not a whole lot up there for us to do right now, and two, because it is exceedingly difficult to hit that moving target. Especially since we somehow managed to lose the variables that were taken into consideration. Right? Everybody's like, well, they did the math in the 60s. Why can't we do it now? It's because we don't have all of the variables. And if you're missing a single variable, it makes an enormous difference. Hypotheses of the origin of the 7 planets and comets. A. We owe the birth of the planets, 1, to an explosion of the sun, a parturition of its central mass. Footnote. If such is the case, how does science explain the comparatively small size of the planets nearest the sun? The theory of meteoric aggregation is only a step farther from truth than the nebular conception, and has not even the quality of the latter, its metaphysical element. Or, 2, to some kind of disruption of the nebular rings. B. The comets are strangers to our planetary system, Laplace. The comets are undeniably generated in our solar system, Faye. C. The fixed stars are motionless, says one authority. All the stars are actually in motion, answers another authority. Undoubtedly, every star is in motion, Wolf. That is true. All things are in motion. There is nothing sitting still. Right? Now, the vast difference between us and Alpha Centauri makes it appear as though it is not moving at all. But, due to recent scientific developments of the James Webb Telescope, which I so love to talk about, we have been able to see things, and some of those things is indeed that those stars move. So, like, once again, this is a time period problem, right? This is a limitation in technology that we have overcome. We do know that the fixed stars are not motionless. We do know that they are actually in motion, and we do know that undoubtedly every star is in motion. We know that. Like, beyond the shadow of a doubt, we know that. So, D. For over 350 million years, the slow and majestic movement of the sun around its axis has never for a moment ceased. That is probably true. E. And the sun, having Alcyone in the Pleiades for the center of its orbit, consumes 180 million of years in completing its revolution. What? Having Alcyone in the Pleiades for the center of its orbit consumes... So, this is possible, but not necessarily true. We do not know where the center of the universe is, right? The origin point of the Big Bang. And I don't necessarily ascribe to the Big Bang theory, but current scientific thought goes in that direction. Now, I believe that we are in a created universe, but that created universe could have been God going bang, right? It is really that simple for me, and so I'm not an astrophysicist. I'm not out there trying to contemplate it. I mean, to me, God did create it, and he may have said bang. He may have created it from a single point, expanding in all directions in infinite space. That is entirely possible. It is one of those things that will probably not be solved, at least in my lifetime, because I am halfway through it, and I doubt very seriously we make strides that far. But this is entirely possible, right? That the solar year, right, the number of years for it to complete its revolution is 180 million. It might be 180 million in 5. It may be 170 million. We do not know. This is one of those things that we have to keep reaffirming. We can guess, we can speculate, but we do not know this answer, even now with our modern technology. F. That the sun has existed more than 15 million years and will emit heat for no longer than 10 million years more. Sir W. Thomson's lecture on the latent dynamical theory regarding the probable origin, total amount of heat, and duration of the sun. This is again speculation. There are many different types of speculation. There are people who speculate that when we went from a hydrogen to a helium sun a couple of years ago, the fog actually explains what they are observing in that, but do you, boo? There is a chance that the sun will burn out in 10 million years. There is a chance that it won't. This is one of those things that we, again, will probably not understand. We do not, as of now, have a full understanding of what is going on in the sun. There are several different speculations upon that. One of them is fission. One of them is fusion. There are people out there that believe that it is just like a candle burning in the middle of space. There are a lot of suppositions. We don't know. This is one of those things that we probably will not know, but my supposition is that the sun is a transfer point from energy from farther out in space. Probably whatever it is that it rotates around. In the same way that we absorb energy from the sun and we get earthquakes and storms from that, it also drives chloroform and the ability to live, right? All of this comes from the energy released from the sun. Now, whether the sun actually creates that energy or is merely a distribution point is up for debate. I lean towards the distribution point. Other people say that it is directly from the sun. Until we can get a better understanding of that, it's going to have to remain speculation. Back to the text. A few years ago, this eminent scientist was telling the world that the time required for the Earth to cool from incipient incrustation to its present state could not exceed 80 million years. Footnote. And even on these figures, Bischoff disagrees with Thomson and calculates that 350 million years would be required for the Earth to cool from a temperature of 20,000 degrees to 200 degrees centigrade. This is also the opinion of Helmholtz. And again, that is speculation and one that we are not even going to be likely to understand. If the encrusted age of the world is only 40 millions, or the half of the duration once allowed, and the sun's age only 15 millions, have we to understand that the Earth was at one time independent of the sun? No. It is a misunderstanding of what is going on. Since the ages of the sun, planets, and the Earth, as stated in the many scientific hypotheses of the astronomers and physicists, are given elsewhere, infra, we have said enough to show the disagreement between the ministers of modern science. Whether we accept the 15 million years of Sir W. Thomson or the 1,000 millions of Mr. Huxley for the rotational evolution of our solar system, it will always come to this: by accepting self-generated rotation for the heavenly bodies composed of inert matter and yet moved by their own internal motion for millions of years, this teaching of science amounts to a. An evident denial that the fundamental physical law, which states that a body in motion tends constantly to inertia, an example, to continue in the same state of motion or rest, unless it is stimulated into further action by a superior active force. B. To an original impulse, which culminates in an unalterable motion within a resisting ether that Newton had declared incompatible with that motion. C. Universal gravity, which, we are taught, always tends to a center in rectilinear descent, alone the cause of the revolution of the whole solar system, which is performing an eternal double gyration, each body around its axis and orbit. Another occasional version is D, a magnet in the sun, or the said revolution due to magnetic force, which acts just as gravitation does in a straight line, varying inversely as the square of the distance. Coulomb's law. That is probably closer to the truth. E. The whole acting under invariable and changeless laws, which are, nevertheless, often shown variable, as during some well-known freaks of planets and other bodies, as also when the comets approach to or recede from the sun. F. A motor force, always proportionate to the mass it is acting upon, but independent of the specific nature of that mass, to which it is proportionate, which amounts to saying, as Le Courtier does, that without that force independent from and of quite another nature than the said mass, the latter, were it as huge as Saturn or as tiny as Ceres, would always fall with the same rapidity. A mass, furthermore, which derives its weight from the body on which it weighs. Thus, neither Laplace's perceptions of a solar atmospheric fluid, which would extend beyond the orbits of the planets, nor Le Courtier's electricity, nor Foucault's heat, nor this, nor the other, can ever help any of the numerous hypotheses about the origin and permanency of rotation to escape from this squirrel's wheel, any more than the theory of gravity itself. This mystery is the Procrustean bed of physical science. If matter is, as now taught, passive, the simplest movement cannot be said to be an essential property of matter, if the latter is simply an inert mass. How, then, can such a complicated movement, compound and multiple, harmonious and equilibrated, lasting in the eternities for millions and millions of years, be attributed simply to its own inherent force, unless the latter is an intelligence? A physical wheel is something new, conceptions that the ancients would never have entertained. Indeed. Footnote. For over a century, all distinction between body and force is made away with. Force is but the property of a body in motion, says the physicist, and life, the property of our animal organs, is but the result of their molecular arrangement, answer the physiologist. In the bosom of that aggregate which is named planet, teaches Littré, are developed all the forces immanent to matter. In example, that matter possesses in itself and through itself the forces that are proper to it, and which are primary, not secondary. Such forces are the property of weight, the property of electricity, of terrestrial magnetism, the property of life. Every planet can develop life, as Earth, for instance, which had not always mankind on it, and now bears produit men. We talk of the weight of the heavenly bodies, says an astronomer, but since it is recognized that weight decreases in proportion to the distance from the center, it becomes evident that, at a certain distance, that weight must be forcibly reduced to zero. Were there any attraction, there would be equilibrium, and since the modern school recognizes neither a beneath nor an above in universal space, it is not clear what should cause the earth to fall, were there even no gravitation nor attraction. Cosmography. Methinks the Count de Maistre was right in solving the question in his own theological way. He cuts the Gordian knot by saying, the planets rotate because they are made to rotate, and the modern physical system of the universe is a physical impossibility. For did not Herschel say the same thing when he remarked that there is a will needed to impart a circular motion, and another will to restrain it? This shows and explains how a retarded planet is cunning enough to calculate so well its time as to hit off its arrival at the fixed minute. 4. If science sometimes succeeds with its great ingenuity in explaining some of the such stoppages, retrograde motions, angles outside the orbits, etc., etc., by appearances resulting from the inequality of their progress, and ours in the course of our mutual and respective orbits, we will know that there are others, and very real and considerable deviations, according to Herschel, which cannot be explained except by the mutual and irregular action of those planets and by the perturbing influence of the sun. Actually, that is better explained by the Tycho's model. If you were unaware, this is your first video. There are a couple different models of the sun, the Copernican being one. Now we all of our various planets, rotate around the sun in fixed orbits. There is another model. It is called the Tycho's model, Tychos. And this model proposes that some things do rotate around the sun, but that some things rotate around Saturn or Jupiter. I forget which one. It's one of the two. For some reason, I cannot keep it straight in my head, but it rotates around one of those. And the retrograde motions is better explained through computer modeling by the rotation around Saturn as opposed to the sun. Through the Tycho's model, instead of a regular elliptical orbit like we see now, or what is instead shown is orbits according to sacred geometry. It fits the various different shapes of sacred geometry in orbit. And this is simply through the use of observable phenomena in the sky, right? The retrograde motion is explained by the Tycho's model much better than it is in the Copernican model, at least in my opinion. If you're unfamiliar with the Tycho's model, you should definitely check that out. We understand, however, that there are, besides those little and accidental perturbations, continuous perturbations called secular, because of the extreme slowness with which the irregularity increases and affects the relations of the elliptic movement, and that these perturbations can be corrected. From Newton, who found that this world needed repairing very often, down to Raynaud, all say the same. In his Ciel et Terre, the latter speaks of the orbits described by the planets as being very far from immutable, on the contrary, subject to perpetual mutation in their position and form. Tycho's model. All prove gravitation and the peripatetic laws to be as negligent as they are quick to repair their mistakes. The charge, as it stands, seems to be that they, the orbits, are alternately widening and narrowing. Their great axis lengthens and diminishes or oscillates at the same time from right to left around the sun. The plane itself in which they are situated, raising and lowering itself periodically, while pivoting around itself with a kind of tremor. Again, the Tycho's model. To this, de Mirville, who believes in intelligent workmen ruling invisibly over the solar system, as we do, not me, her, observes very wittily, footnote, Deuxième Mémoire Manifestations Historiques. Voilà certes a voyage which has little in it of mechanical rigor. At the utmost, one could compare it to a steamer, pulled to and fro and tossed on the waves, retarded or accelerated, all and each of which impediments might put off its arrival indefinitely, were there not the intelligences of a pilot and engineers to catch up the time lost and to repair the damages. And again, it is much better explained by the Tycho's model than it is by some entity holding a planet in place. Not that I don't believe in entities, I just do not ascribe them this much power. The law of gravity, however, seems to be becoming an obsolete law in starry heaven. At any rate, those long-haired sidereal radicals, called comets, appear to be very poor respecters of the majesty of that law, and to beard it quite imprudently. Nevertheless, and though presenting in nearly every respect phenomena not yet fully understood, comets and meteors are credited by the believers in modern science with obeying the same laws and consisting of the same matter as the sun, stars, and nebulae, and even the earth and its inhabitants. Laing's Modern Science and Modern Thought. This is what one might call taking things on trust, aye, even to blind faith. But exact science is not to be questioned, and he who rejects the hypotheses imagined by her students, gravitation for instance, would be regarded as an ignorant fool for it. Yet, we are told by the just cited author a queer legend from the scientific annals. The comet of 1811 had a tail 120 millions of miles in length and 25 millions of miles in diameter at the widest part, while the diameter of the nucleus was about 127,000 miles, more than 10 times that of the Earth. He tells us, in order that bodies of this magnitude, passing near the Earth, should not affect its motion or change the length of the year by even a single second, their actual substance must be inconceivably rare. It must be so indeed, yet. The extreme tenuity of a comet's mass is also proved by the phenomena of the tail, which, as the comet approaches the sun, is thrown out sometimes to a length of 90 millions of miles in a few hours, And what is remarkable, this tail is thrown out against the force of gravity by some repulsive force, electromagnetism, probably electrical, so that it always points away from the sun. And yet, then as the matter of comets must be, it obeys the common law of gravity. And whether the comet revolves in an orbit within that of the outer planets, or shoots off into the abysses of space and returns only after hundreds of years, its path is, at each instant, regulated by the same force as that which causes an apple to fall to the ground. Yeah. Science is like Caesar's wife, and must not be suspected. This is evident, but it can be respectfully criticized nevertheless. At all events, it may be reminded that the apple is a dangerous fruit. For the second time in the history of mankind, it may become the cause of the fall, this time of exact science. A comet whose tail defies the laws of gravity right in the sun's face can hardly be credited with obeying that law. In a series of scientific works on astronomy and the nebular theory written between 1865 and 1866, the present writer, a poor tyro in silence, has counted in a few hours no less than 39 contradictory hypotheses offered as explanations for the self-generated, primitive rotary motion of the heavenly bodies. The writer is no astronomer, no mathematician, no scientist, but was obliged to examine these errors in defense of occultism in general, and what is still more important, in order to support the occult teachings concerning astronomy and cosmology. Occultists were threatened with terrible penalties for questioning scientific truth, but now they feel braver. Science is less secure in its impregnable position than they were led to expect, and many of its strongholds are built on very shifting sands. Thus, even this poor and unscientific examination of it was useful, and it was certainly very instructive. We have learned a good many things. In fact, having studied with particular care those astronomical data that would be the most likely to clash with our heterodox and superstitious beliefs. So, for instance, we have found there, concerning gravitation, the axial and orbital motions. That synchronous movement having been once overcome in the early stage, it was enough to originate a rotary motion till the end of Manvantara. We have also come to know in all the aforesaid combinations of possibilities with regard to incipient rotation, most complicated in every case, some of the causes to which it may have been due, as well as some others to which it ought and should have been due, but in some way or another was not. Among other things, we were informed that incipient rotation may be provoked with equal ease in a mass in igneous fusion, and that in one is characterized by glacial opacity, heaven and earth. That gravitation is a law which nothing can overcome, but which, nevertheless, is overcome in and out of season by the most ordinary celestial and terrestrial bodies, the tails of impudent comets, for instance. That we owe the universe to the holy creative trinity, called inert matter, senseless force, and blind chance. Of the real essence and nature of any of these three, science knows nothing, but this is a trifling detail. Ergo, we are told that when a mass of cosmic or nebular matter, whose nature is unknown, entirely so, and which may be in a state of fusion, Laplace, or dark and cold, Thomson, for this intervention of heat is itself a pure hypothesis, Faye, decides to exhibit its mechanical energy under the form of rotation, it acts in this wise. It, the mass, either bursts into spontaneous conflagration or remains inert, tenebrous, and frigid, both states being equally capable of sending it, without any adequate cause, spinning through space for millions of years. Its movements may be retrograde, and they may be direct, about 100 various reasons being offered for both motions, in about as many hypotheses. Anyhow, joining the maze of stars, whose origin belongs to the same miraculous and spontaneous order, for the nebular theory does not profess to discover the origin of things, but only a stadium in material history. Those millions of suns, planets, and satellites composed of inert matter will whirl on in most impressive and majestic symmetry around the firmament, moved and guided only, their inertia notwithstanding, by their own internal motion. Shall we wonder after this if the learned mystics, pious Roman Catholics, and even such learned astronomers as were Cobard and Godefroy, footnote, l'univers explique par la révélation and cosmogony de la révélation. But C. de Merville's Duxemia Memoir, the author, a terrible enemy of occultism, was yet one who wrote great truths. As were Cobard and Godefroy, have preferred the Kabbalah and the ancient systems to the modern dreary and contradictory exposition of the universe. The Zohar makes a distinction, at any rate, between the Hajaskah, the light forces, and Hashkoser, reflected lights, and the simple phenomenon exteriority of their spiritual types. See Kabbalah de Nudata. The question of gravity may now be dismissed, and other hypotheses examined. That physical science knows nothing of forces is clear. We may close the argument, however, by calling to our help one more man of science, Professor Jomet, member of the Academy of Medicine in Montpellier. Says this learned man, speaking of forces, a cause is that which is essentially acting in the genealogy of phenomenon, in every production as in every modification. I said that activity, or force, was invisible. To suppose it corporeal and residing in the properties of matter would be a gratuitous hypothesis. To reduce all the causes to God would amount to embarrassing oneself with a hypothesis hostile to many verities. But to speak of a plurality of forces proceeding from the deity and possessing inherent powers of their own is not unreasonable, and I am disposed to admit phenomena produced by intermediate agents or forces, called forces or secondary agents. The distinction of forces is the principle of the division of sciences. So many real and separate forces, so many mother sciences. No, forces are not suppositions and abstractions, but realities, and the only acting realities whose attributes can be determined with the help of direct observation and induction. Sur la distinction des forces, published in the Mémoires de l'Académie des Sciences de Montpellier. And that is going to bring us to the end of the theories of rotation science. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a not too difficult topic. I understand that I hold some unconventional beliefs, and I have a tendency to step on toes when I relay those. It is not intentional, but it is not something I apologize for. This is all speculation, right? We still do not have a full understanding of gravity. I don't care who you ask, they don't know. They can guess, they can make learned guesses, they can add value to the suppositions, undoubtedly, but they are still suppositions. We do not have a test to prove the theory of gravity in the way that it would need to be in order for us to call it truth. It will remain a theorem until we can understand how to counteract it by some method other than going into space. Right? We do not have anti-gravity down. Even in a vacuum, gravity still affects. So it is something outside of the atmosphere. It is something outside of the materiality. That is true. But I doubt very seriously that it is an entity, and that when I take this lighter and I drop it, I don't believe that there is some entity attached to that pushing it down to the ground. I just don't. Is there an entity around me? Probably several of them. But I don't believe that they have the autonomy that we as created humans on the 5D plane of existence have. They serve a purpose that we do not understand in the same way that we do not understand gravity. We have suppositions, but we do not know. And that is always important to remember. If you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, share, and a sub. Throw me a comment if you agree or disagree with anything that was stated here. If it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. If you have another work you would like to see me discuss in the manner that we are doing here, drop that in the comments as well. And if you really like what I'm doing, hit me with that super thanks. It will be greatly appreciated. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt State. Peace.